James chapter 1, verse 12 through 18. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. I was struck by this expression in the middle of this passage, a one little sentence in verse 16, which says, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. And I asked myself, what is James telling me I shouldn't be deceived about? There's a sentence before and there's a sentence after. What is James, is God trying to tell me I shouldn't be deceived about? And I'm going to take it as both, before and after. And very simple things about 13 and 14 and 15. That's the before, do not be deceived. And don't be deceived why you fell into sin. Sandeep, don't be deceived why you fell into sin earlier today or yesterday or 5 minutes back. Don't be deceived. Don't think it is for any other reason but verse 14. You were carried away and enticed by your own lust. It wasn't my wife, it wasn't my children, it wasn't my coworker, it wasn't anybody else. The reason you even came into that temptation is because you got carried away. And then you allowed that desire to conceive, and it gave birth in sin. Don't be deceived. There's nobody to blame but yourself. And don't be deceived that sin is going to cause death in you. Don't be deceived along any of those ways. Along the way, as we give in to sinful thoughts, if we give in to sinful patterns, you don't have to blame your family, your neighbors, your society. You were carried away. And don't be deceived. It's going to end up in death. It's going to kill you. It's not some small little thing that you can allow to do it. Don't be deceived. So I think the summary of that, it should be nothing new to you, is that we must take temptations very seriously. No matter where the temptations come from, one thing we can know, it didn't originate from God. God may have allowed it, but God doesn't tempt anybody. That's what it says in verse 13. But I get carried away. And I have to be very careful that it doesn't end up in death. That is how serious sin is. And that's where I can deceive myself about it. In thinking how I spend my time, what is in my thoughts. Don't be deceived, Sandeep. When you start thinking evil about somebody else in your mind, don't be deceived. You're getting carried away by all the emotions that are in your head. Don't be deceived. It'll conceive sin and it'll cause death in you. Don't be deceived. That's the one part of that. Do not be deceived. That's what comes before that. And the other part of it is what comes after that. Don't be deceived, brothers and sisters. God is so good. God is so good. Don't be deceived. God is so good. Everything comes from, every good thing and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights. There is no shifting shadow. There's no shadow in a light that comes from the sun. There's no shadow in the sun. It's when it comes through the trees of this earth that shadows come. It's when the things of this earth block it. It's other things that block, but God's full of light, and it's pure light. And his thoughts for you, his intentions for you, his plans for you are all good, are so amazingly good. Don't be deceived. Don't allow yourself to be deceived that God has anything but the best plans for your life. As we heard, that is why we have to be very careful against anxiety. And the way we take a sword against anxiety is to see the deception that the devil is trying to bring into me. He's trying to deceive me about how good God is. And he's trying to tell me God's not that good. But verse 17 and verse 18, this is how good God is. God brought us forth, verse 18, so that we would be the first fruit of all his creatures. He chose us to be first. He chose those he has called, and he says, I want you to be in the front of the line of all human beings. Forget the animals, the lions and the cheetahs and all of the other animals. Even among humans, we are called to be the first fruits because God opened our eyes to the truth of who he is and that Jesus died for us. I mean, imagine that. Not everybody has that. We all have relatives and friends who probably don't see that. The truths of the new covenant. We didn't deserve it. He chose us and said, you come to the front of the line. You come. I'm going to get you first. I'm going to serve you first. The first fruits. Don't be deceived, dear brothers and sisters. God is so good to you. So these are the things that we have to take to our daily life, our weekly life, and say, Lord, how did I spend my 24 hours, the same amount of talents that you give everybody else? Did I live in deception? On the one hand, thinking that sin, I can treat it lightly, or that it won't end up in death, it won't kill me spiritually, on the one hand. Or did I give in so much to my anxieties rather than fighting it with how good God is? That God brought me to the front of the line. Line yourself up with all the people in your school. Line yourself up with all the people in your community, in your town. Think about all the people you grew up with in your town, in your neighborhoods. You're probably one of the few who have been opened your eyes to these truths. What did he do? God said, hey, you, come to the front of the line. I'm going to open your eyes to this. Think about all your relatives who never got to hear this. And God said, I want you to be a first fruit. Don't be deceived, dear brothers and sisters. God has been so good to us. He's brought us to the front of the line. He told you, I want you to be the first fruit. First, top the best fruits among all his creatures. So what should we do? Verse 12. Because of this, rather than be deceived by either one of those two, don't be deceived of how dangerous temptation and sin is. Don't be deceived that God is not good. God is totally good. And so what should I do as a result? Persevere under trial. He's chosen you for a first fruit, and he's got a crown of life that he's prepared for you and he's promised for you. And he's saying, I've got it reserved for you. Persevere under trial. Don't give up. Don't get deceived by these side roads that branch out from the narrow road that leads to life. There's a crown waiting for us at the end of our lives for those who persevere under the trials of anxiety or whatever the sins there are. Let us fight against deception. Don't be deceived. Each one of us is tempted when we are carried away. Lord Jesus, my mouth got carried away. I'm not going to blame anybody else who provoked me. I'm not going to blame the situation, which is why I'm caught up with anxiety. No, Lord, I'm allowing myself to get carried away. Let me think about you, You are so good, and you're calling me to be a first fruit. You brought me in so many ways already to the front of the line, ahead of everybody else in my family, in most cases, ahead of most of them in my town, in my neighborhood, my streets. You pulled me up to the front of the line to be a first fruit. Blessed is a man who perseveres. Lord, I'll do my part. I'll just stick with you. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep coming back to you and fighting the deception that can easily trip us up. So may God help us. God is for you, dear brothers and sisters, more than you can imagine. And you just have to think about it. Think about all the people who died, whom you know, who are younger than you. And think about all the people who don't know the love of God, who don't get to hear these truths week after week. And ask yourself, why? God, why did you do that for me? Why'd you pull me up to the front of the line? I didn't deserve this. What did I do? For no reason. It says there in verse 18, in the exercise of his will. He just decided. He said, Sandeep, come to the front of the line. And he put your name there. In the exercise of his will. He got to choose it. No other reason. He brought us forth. He brought us to the front of the line. Let us live in lives of that gratitude. God, I don't need anything in my life. I just want to persevere under trial. And God says it'll get even better for you. If you persevere under trial, you'll get a crown of life. It's a wonderful gospel, dear brothers and sisters, that we have in front of us. May God help us to persevere under trial.